This video is sponsored by Squarespace. There is a very important event happening in the miniature wargaming hobby this year. Although even fans who are in the know might not realize just how important this year will be for the future of all things Warhammer Fantasy. I am of course referring to the release of Warhammer, the Old World, and everything they aren't telling you. The Old World is Games Workshop's newest game that will be available for purchase this week. And it's a sort of revival of one of their very oldest games that they stopped making back in 2015, Warhammer Fantasy Battles. This would be significant enough in itself as that game has a real cult following who've been asking for it back for a very long time. But something you might not be considering is we are also on schedule to receive a brand new edition of Games Workshop's current most profitable fantasy game, Warhammer Age of Sigmar, in just a few months, probably later this summer, making this the sort of year of new and sort of old fantasy content for Games Workshop. And depending on how each of these releases go, how profitable they are compared to one another, I have to imagine it's going to have an impact on the sort of fantasy content we'll be seeing from GW going forward. So we're at a really unprecedented crossroads right now, and I just think it's so interesting that we're finally going to see the big two fantasy games coexisting at the same time. As over the past decade, Age of Sigmar has been set up as this sort of replacement for the traditional Warhammer fantasy line. But as many people in the hobby will tell you, it's not really the same at all. It's quite different, and personally, I like different. But as you might expect, not everyone feels that way. And I still come across a lot of people who have this instinctual, let's call it charitably, a dislike for Age of Sigmar in our hobby, as they perceive it as this force that killed their favorite game. Now, obviously, I'm not one of those people. I enjoy the Mortal Realms as well as the Old World. But I mean, yeah, I get it. Games Workshop games tend to be lifestyle games. And if I had invested a ton of time and money and attention over years, maybe even decades, into a game system, into a world, only for the company that makes it to suddenly discontinue it and replace it with something very different that sort of uses the same models, kind of, I'd probably be pretty bitter as well. But the truth is, Games Workshop isn't a person. It's not even a group of people. It's a corporation. And while people may work there, corporations are kind of their own beast, and it's a beast that follows the money. And I'm assuming, I think most people assume, I think it's common knowledge, that the reason Warhammer Fantasy was discontinued was that it wasn't making enough money to justify continuing to produce it, at least compared to the corporation's other rich gold mine that is Warhammer 40k. But now, a decade has passed since that happened, and things are quite different now. Age of Sigmar has developed its own unique audience that is no longer really living in the shadow of Warhammer Fantasy, despite what some deranged cultists who live underground might tell you. Meanwhile, Warhammer Fantasy fans do still exist, and they're hungry for nostalgic old world content. And it's not only ancient beings like myself who enjoy Warhammer Fantasy, as a brand new fanbase has started to crop up around the Total War video game series, which is set in that same nostalgic old world. In addition, I feel like there's a lot of people like me who maybe started off with Age of Sigmar, but learned about the old world and fell in love with it through things like Old White Dwarf magazines or purchasing retro boxes of models on eBay. So with all of these things, the stage is finally set. And in theory, with all of these new and old fan bases combined, there should be enough demand now for Games Workshop to support two fantasy settings. One a bit nostalgic with square bases and rank and flank gameplay, and one a bit stranger, a bit more modern, on round bases with overly complicated skulls. But is that really true? Is there truly enough demand to support two separate fantasy franchises from the same company? Or will one vastly outsell the other, leading to one being discontinued? Well, part 2. Doubt. When the Old World was announced a few years ago, the marketing framed it as sort of like a World of Warcraft classic situation. A sort of, you guys asked for it? Here you go! And then there's a bunch of applause from the fans. And over the years, we got occasional updates on the game's production, mostly in the form of art, lore updates, rules updates, that sort of thing. But in 2023, as we got closer and closer to the Old World's release, it slowly became clear that this game was a bit of a, how should I put this? A bit of a budget release, as instead of a brand new big starter set as you might expect, full of updates of old models resculpted for a modern era, we are instead getting two rather expensive army boxes. But these new armies are made up of almost entirely old models. I think there's 1 or 2 new models in each box, which do look rather nice, I admit. But basically you're getting a whole bunch of old models, priced really as if they were new models. Alongside this, we are getting a few new models, mostly cast in Forge World resin, as well as limited made-to-order releases of some old metal models. I'll be honest though, the new models do look really great, and I'm really excited to paint some of them, especially the Bretonnians. But the rest of the range, the rest of the pricing, leaves me a little bit worried for the longevity of this product. But do you know whose range of fantastic products with affordable pricing doesn't leave me worried for its future longevity? That's right, it's this video's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one website and hosting platform that I have been using for over a decade now for all of my website needs. And it's extremely easy to use. You just pick from one of their gorgeously designed pre-made templates, add in any extra pages or features you might like, and then customize things to your heart's content using their extremely intuitive drag and drop grid system. No coding or technical knowledge required. I've been using my current Squarespace website over at howlcorp.com to house a gallery of my painted miniatures, all of my painting reference documents, as well as my online store, and I've been really happy with the results so far. So if you need a website, why not check out squarespace.com today for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/DanaHowell for 10% off your very first purchase of a website or domain. Alright, so let's get to the second half of the video. My worries, my doubts, and my predictions for the future of the Old World, as well as the all-important question, am I going to be buying and painting this thing? So like I said, we have a handful of releases coming out for the Old World this week. We get the 2 army boxes, we get a few new releases, but aside from that, it's mostly rulebooks and accessories designed to bring your old Warhammer armies from pre-2015 into the new Old World. And for this, I think that's really commendable. Because all of the marketing for this game was ostensibly for those old fans, I'm happy that they're actually supporting them. It's nice to see them support this idea of taking your old armies that have been on your shelf for years and bringing them into this new game. All you need to do is buy the new rulebook, buy the new index book, maybe buy your army's new arcane journal, rebase all of your armies, and that's only going to cost you, okay. Well, that is a little bit steep just to convert your old armies into the new game. But let's be honest, it's Games Workshop. You expect to pay a little bit more than you expect to play the game. But let's say you don't have your own fantasy army yet. Let's say you're like me, you weren't there for the Old World, you want to buy a brand new army instead of painting your empire and goblins you have on the shelf right over there. Your other option is to pay about double that price to get a whole big brand new army with the rulebook, all the templates and dice and things included. And this option seems a little bit more reasonable to me, and I think that's the intention. I think they priced the rulebook and the indexes a little bit higher to sort of encourage you, like, you know, if you're gonna spend $150, why not spend $300 and get a whole new army alongside the rulebooks. So these seem a little bit more reasonable, but like I said, these are mostly decades old sculpts in these boxes that you're paying a premium price for. So no matter what option you're choosing to get into the old world, it's a bit of an ask. It's a bit of a premium product, even compared to Games Workshop's baseline, which is already pretty steep. And most of the new sculpts, most of the new models seem to be being produced in resin, not plastic, making them a little less beginner friendly. I hate working with resin models. So the feeling that I get from this, the feeling that I think a lot of people seem to be getting from this, is that they're testing the waters a little bit to see what the demand is like. They aren't confident that this game can immediately turn a profit, so it's almost as if they're turning to the fans and they're saying, you want this game back? Well, pay up. Support it, and if you do support it, maybe we'll give you some new models. At least that's the feeling that I'm getting from this initial release wave. Obviously, I can't read the minds of the corporate AI that run Games Workshop, as I'm definitely not a corporate AI focused only on profit myself. But that's my best guess. As if they were confident this game would turn a profit, I have to expect the initial release wave would look something more like the Horus Heresy's recent release, with the starter set being expensive, but at least it contained 2 full armies, at least it contained all new sculpts, all new plastic kits. At least that's what I thought when I started writing this script. But since I started writing this, there has been a leak online of a certain dice set, which leads me to my new theory of what the plan is, of where this game is going, and I don't think it's what you think it's going to be. Part 3, what they aren't telling you. Now for this section, we're putting on our tinfoil hats. This is not based on anything in reality other than a hunch and a dice set leak. So take this with a grain of salt, we're just having fun here. But I think the reason that Games Workshop has been super tight-lipped about this game, why some of the wording about its release has been kind of awkward, things like this game isn't getting a starter set, why we haven't gotten a roadmap for future releases for this game yet, is essentially for FOMO reasons. They're framing this week's release, the Bretonnians versus the Tomb Kings, the expensive rulebook, the big index books, as the main launch of the game, the sort of Leviathan set, the Dominion set, you know what I mean? They're framing this as the release week, so that you, the distinguished old world consumer, feel like you really only have a few options for getting into this game. You buy the Tomb Kings box, you buy the Bretonnians box, or you buy the rulebook and the index and use your old army. But in reality, it is my theory that you're going to have way more options than this, as this game will not have only 2 starter boxes, but 9. That's right, this game's release isn't happening this week, it's being spread out over the next year. And here's how I think that will go. Around March or April, we'll get another huge release wave. We'll get another pair of $300 or more boxes, one for dwarves, one for orcs and goblins. Maybe it'll come with the rulebook, maybe it won't, maybe they'll get you to buy the rulebook separately. And this will mostly follow the pattern of the Bretonnians and the Tomb Kings, with most of the models in the box being old plastics with maybe 1 or 2 new models. Each faction will get its own arcane journal, and if we're lucky, we might even get a few new Forge World models for each faction beyond that. In June or July, we'll do the same thing all over again with High Elves and Chaos. 2 new big expensive army boxes, 2 new arcane journals, 2 new dice sets, the works. After this, I would expect Wood Elves and Beastmen in October, once again, same thing, and ending off the year with a big Empire box around the holidays. So why aren't they telling us this? Why is all the marketing framing these 2 big boxes as the starter sets for the game? Well, it's obvious, isn't it? It's to make more money. It's to capitalize on FOMO, as if you knew all of these army boxes were coming later this year, you'd probably just save your money for the army you actually want to play instead of buying Bretonnians or Tomb Kings. But because you don't know there's more budget army boxes coming, you might end up buying the Bretonnia box. And then a few months later, when Orcs and Goblins comes out, you might buy that box. And then you might buy High Elves, You see what I'm saying, right? You might buy more boxes than you would have otherwise, while if you'd known this was all happening ahead of time, you might have just saved up all your money to buy the one box you really want. But of course, this is all just a theory. I don't have any insider knowledge. I could be totally wrong about all of this. But if I was trying to find a way to resurrect an absolutely massive range of old models, many of which you probably need to make new molds for, and I imagine that process would be pretty expensive, that is how I would do it. I would do it in the form of big FOMO army boxes, because you're making those models anyway. Why not slap them all together in a big budget box, charge a whole bunch of money for it, and then use that initial first year of those boxes to help fund the mold making. And I could be wrong about it all being packed into 1 year. They could space these releases out over 2 or 3 years. That's also possible. But once this process is complete, once all the new molds are made for those old models, once everything is in production again, and they can actually see if the game is profitable or not, which armies are selling better than others, that would be when I would sit back and I would plan future model releases for this game. But that's just me. I could be totally wrong about all of this. This is just a hunch that I have based on the initial release wave and patterns of I almost said James Workshop, and patterns of Games Workshop's releases in the past. But what about you, dear consumer? Will you be purchasing any of these big army boxes? Are you going to be painting a Bretonnian army, or maybe a Tomb King's army? Or will you wait a bit to see if we get any other army boxes this year, or if AOS gets a 4th edition with Skaven or Dark Elves, which you might want those more than the Old World, so maybe you're thinking of saving your money for that. Personally, I am torn between buying the Bretonnia box and painting it up in a really fun, colorful, retro way, or waiting a few months to see if we are going to get that big budget Orcs and Goblins box. I would really like that. If they made that, I would be really tempted. Plus, I do have some fantasy models I already own that I could be painting up in the meantime while I wait to see how this all shakes out. But let me know what you're planning on doing down in the comments. As always, thank you so much for watching, and if you'd like to see this video ad-free, you can join us over on Patreon, over at patreon.com/DanaHowl, where I will be putting up all of this year's videos ad-free, as well as getting access to our extremely exclusive, inclusive Discord server. Speaking of which, thank you to all of our patrons and their names running by right now. I really appreciate your support. Wouldn't be able to run this channel without you. And with that, I will see you in the next video.